History has taught us that the unrestricted flow of news and command information is critical to our military audience.
This is an AFN Newsline update. I'm Sergeant Steve German. We're breaking into current news coverage from the United States concerning the attack on the Twin Towers in New York City and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C.
General Osmond seemed pleased with the progress the 173rd has made here at Basra Airfield, and he left with the knowledge that the northern Iraq now has a fighting force that could tip the scales as this war hopefully comes to a close. Reporting from Basra, Iraq, Army Sergeant Aaron Talley, AFN News.
I would think that working for BDN and working for AFN meant that practically I was home.
The Southern European Network was formed in 1955 at Camp Darby, Italy, as a closed-circuit broadcast system. In 1969, after a move to Verona, the network was finally able to get a signal over the air. Shortly after that, they moved again to Caserma Ederle in Vicenza. In 1976, they added TV to the network, and 3 years later, changed the name from SCN to Southern European Broadcasting. But the fight to give their audience broadcast services like those available in the States was not over.
It was either in January or February of 79 or 80 when we actually received a live feed of the Super Bowl. It was the first ever Super Bowl satellite feed. It was the only thing we got up to that point.
We had satellite football games. We were still closed circuit. And the way that worked, we would contact, when we found out what game we could get on which weekend, well ahead of time. We would contact RAI, Radio Edizione Italiana, which controlled the broadcasting in Italy. And they would send a satellite truck to the base, and they would put that truck right next to the building. And they would pick up the transponder and carry the ball game, feed it to us, and we would send it out on our system.
The RAI satellite was used for sending signals back to the States as well, and it became a fixture on the base in 1981 when Verona and the NATO commander made headlines worldwide.
I wasn't here more than a couple weeks when General James Dozier was kidnapped. I was brand new here.
My understanding was that he was out jogging one day in the city streets of Verona, where the members of the Red Brigade accosted him, threw him in a car, and he remained kidnapped for a good 2 months. When he was finally released, the official press conference took place right on Caserma Ederle inside the Post Chapel, and I can recall standing side by side with Peter Jennings, who was the lone U.S. network correspondent representative. ABC even had, together with RAI, a big uplink truck out in the parking lot that faced the front of the chapel.
This was just a few weeks after I got here, in '81, so that stands out as a really big thing, news-wise. Not a pleasant thing for CTAF, but certainly something you remember if you were here.
The incident highlighted the need for satellite services, and in 1983, the network began negotiating with the Italian government for their own dish, a dream that was realized 2 years later.
The fact is that a big winter storm in 1985 postponed the initiation of the satellite here. We had the dish in a warehouse in Vicenza, and the roof collapsed and crushed the feeder horn of the satellite dish.
So they had to order a new feeder horn because it was specially built, made for our dish. So we had to wait another 3 to 4 months before that feeder horn came in.
So we were planning to go on uplink in April, and I think we had to postpone that till June.
In a ceremony here on Caserma Ederle in 1985, the U.S. ambassador to Italy then, a Honorable Maxwell Rabb, threw a ceremonial switch that officially activated the Southern European Broadcasting Network.
A way of encouraging and serving as a real boost for morale, I think it is a satellite television network such as this one.
And activate the network.
At that time, we had a 16-meter dish over here on the fence line, And we needed, the technology has obviously changed a lot since then, and we needed a large dish just to bring the signal down from, at that time, the broadcast center in Sunnyvale, California.
Part of the programming day was originated locally via the tapes, and then part of it was originated via satellite.
Good evening, I'm Air Force Sergeant Jerry Cormier. The B-2 bomber has only recently been the cause of controversy in Congress. After 10 years of approving funds for the development of the B-2, ABC's Jack Smith reports some of the bomber's former supporters have bailed out.
By the end of the 80s, the network had adapted to SatNet operations, and their audience grew, with viewers from Torrejon, Spain to the Sinai Peninsula. And within a few months, their broadcast power was put to the test.
It was in late 89, early 90, that AFN South engineers and broadcasters deployed to Southwest Asia to establish the Desert Shield and Desert Storm network.
In my generation of broadcasters and military people, and a lot of the other folks hadn't actually ramped up for a full-scale war before, so no one really knew what to expect. We were on 12-hour shifts. Things were locked down tight. You know, the preparation was there was tension in the air, that's for sure.
Our production teams here were both forward deployed and back here at the network headquarters distributing that command information.
We would hear from some of the sites in the desert and everything that we didn't even know we were serving.
As a matter of fact, I recall in particular an episode of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson where he was reading a letter.
Where we happen to live. My wife works for the U.S. Army here. She receives over the air The Tonight Show on Southern European Broadcasting, the local outlet for Armed Forces Radio and Television. I'm sure that comes as no surprise. What may be news to you is that starting 15th August, which was last week, SEB will be carrying its signal and Tonight Show to our recently arrived troops in Saudi Arabia. They get the show the very next day. It's not delayed like a month or something, so it's up to date. He says the program is also monitored by the Iraqis. Is that interesting? Yeah.
Throughout the war in the Gulf, positive feedback from the troops rallied SEB support for the men and women in America's armed forces who were a part of it all.
Another challenging time was when we actually became a total network with AFN Europe.
Remember, in those days, we were downsizing. We're downsizing all the military services, particularly the Army. We're downsizing the number of forces that we had here within Europe.
It happened in January '93, so it was only about 5 months after I took command.
The decision was made that because of manpower reductions and troop reductions, that in fact that we would abandon the uplink there and go with a single uplink out of Germany that would serve the entire region.
The campaign slogan that we had at that time, to inform the audience that we were actually joining forces, if you will. The slogan was, "Good things are coming together."
In a way, it was kind of a shame because we were no longer making programming decisions for our own audience.
We went to being a key station because we still controlled the other affiliates, and we were just an affiliate ourselves.
We basically brought everything under the umbrella of AFN Europe and changed the folded case to colors for SEB and stood up AFN South as a subordinate command of AFN Europe.
We knew that it was all for the better with the AFN Europe becoming one family, which is probably the way it should have been anyway from the very beginning.
As a key station, AFN South took the lead in providing service to all deployments in the region, establishing broadcast operations from Africa to Albania.
This mission, however, was only an exercise, but an exercise of historic significance. This was the first jump into a conflict or peacekeeping zone in Europe since World War II.
During Operation Deny Flight from 1993 to 1995, our journalists traveled with air crews throughout that operation and produced news and documentary features on the 5th Allied Tactical Air Force.
That was one of the biggest stories that we covered, and NATO obviously was involved with that. And they had a public information center set up at Dalmolin Air Base, which is right outside of Vicenza. And we were always going out there for press conferences and getting various stories.
During the 24 hours a day that NATO nations are flying over Bosnia, enforcing a no-fly zone, various types of aircraft are being flown. What you see behind me is the Mirage 2000, the fighter the French are using.
Between 1993 and 1996, NATO enforced an arms embargo on the former Yugoslavia and helped create the conditions for a peace agreement. And during that operation, AFN South deployed several production crews to ships of the Standing Naval Force Mediterranean, while those vessels conducted interdiction and deterrence missions in the Adriatic Sea.
For many months of the war, the airlift provided more than 85% of aid going to this city.
And in 1994, AFN South covered the U.S. military's relief efforts that helped prevent a large-scale humanitarian disaster when thousands of refugees were fleeing from a civil war in Rwanda.
In order to keep those here in Italy aware of the current situation with their loved ones in the Congo, Major General Ed Smith, forward Chief of Staff for the operation, Colonel Eric Wildeman, spoke to us from his base in the town of Brazzaville.
Ladies and gentlemen, CTAF soldiers, along with others from all four services, as a matter of fact, are all here in the town of Brazzaville, just across the Congo River.
And from 1995 to 1999, AFN South supported AFRTS operations in Bosnia during joint endeavor.
There are increasing security concerns over the safety of aircraft in the skies above Bosnia's capital. Army Sergeant Tyler Broadway spoke with the commander of the NATO Implementation Force, Admiral Leighton Smith, and files this report.
Aircraft arriving in the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo have drawn fire from unknown sources on the ground.
And in 1997, AFN South personnel accompanied U.S. forces into Albania to cover evacuation operations from the capital city of Tirana during Operation Silver Wake. And during this operation, AFN South personnel came under fire as they participated in an emergency airlift operation for civilians in that area.
This task force brings soldiers based in Germany, Italy, the Azores, and the U.S. together for a common goal. Their mission to receive and direct vital supplies to troops in Albania.
It was during this time that broadcasting stepped into the digital age.
When I first got here to Vicenza in August '99, the news cutters and media composers were pretty much the editing systems. There wasn't much of the linear editing going on video-wise. It was still very much a new technology.
We had some good young broadcasters here at the time when this stuff first came in the building, who had a good mind for things and trained up people who couldn't grasp it, maybe like me, like some of the old-timers who couldn't really, understand what they were doing right. We had some young folks who really helped us out at the time.
The first step was the editing system, but we still had analog all the way up to the editing system and analog after the editing system. And then slowly we had the voice became digital, and then the cameras became digital, and then finally we're going to be going in the next few months, hopefully, to the on-air being digital, being all the way to the actual transmitter. And it's going to be it's just been interesting to watch the whole process go from all analog to all digital, and you can't just do it all at once.
We're breaking into current news coverage from the United States concerning the attack on the Twin Towers in New York City and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The forces within the U.S.
You could be an American anywhere, and September 11th touched you. It affected you.
I wasn't here. I was in Atlanta.
I was actually at home. I was sick that day.
Actually, what happened was we were sitting in a staff meeting on September 11th with the commander.
And it was just a day like any other. Well, brilliantly pretty day in Atlanta. There were no clouds in the sky.
Fell asleep, took a nap, and woke up. Just got up to watch TV, and I was watching the sports network.
The commander received a call from his wife, and we had a TV set in the office, but none of us were watching the television. We were listening to the commander.
And all of a sudden, at the bottom it said, for complete coverage, tune to AFN Atlantic. And I was like, coverage of what? And so I switched over, and it was live coverage of the first one had been hit, the second one hadn't been hit yet.
It didn't dawn on us that it was an actual attack until the commander received a second call, again from his wife, who had received information that the Pentagon had been attacked.
The entire building shook, the windows rattled. I looked outside to see construction workers running, and in the hallways it was pandemonium. It quickly filled with smoke.
We immediately started ramping up our operation here to, first and foremost, check on the security of our personnel throughout our affiliate stations.
You're very aware of being in Italy and being in a different country, and yet you still felt that touch and that you felt the emotion that was your country that was being attacked.
And if you're sitting over here in Europe, I can just imagine if you're in Vicenza or Livorno or La Maddalena or Sigonella, and you're trying to find out what's happening.
AFN Vicenza's Larry Kreider has been in the stage training with the Turner Broadcast Group. He describes the atmosphere in Atlanta.
American flags are displayed everywhere, mounted on poles, stuck on the back of pickup trucks, taped to radio antennas, flapping in the breeze. Flags are in such demand that suppliers have run out.
We here at AFN realized that there was more and more people watching and listening to AFN to get updates.
We went on 24-hour ops right away. We had somebody sleeping in a cot here, ready to do whatever announcements were necessary. And it was the first time that I was in where it was that real-time environment, real-time news environment, where we had to be ready at the drop of a hat to go on the air and say what needed to be said. And that we knew we were important and that people were listening to us to get the information they needed because they had questions and they didn't know what was going on.
I want to take a moment and explain what we are carrying in the form of programming and local command information. Currently, we are supplying you
I felt like our troops did an outstanding job of going above and beyond the call of duty during that time.
It was about a year and a half after September 11, and the whole buildup had been happening going into Iraq for about 6 months.
Everybody was kind of on edge because family members, soldiers, everybody was on edge because no one knew exactly when things were going to happen. I don't think the airborne knew exactly when they were going to happen.
We had about a month to a month and a half of standby status where it was, you're going, you're not going, you're going, you're not going. And it was really hard emotionally to deal with that kind of, are we going, are we not?
I would say that was the biggest airborne operation that I've been involved in here. That's the biggest operation involved the 22nd Area Support Group. It involved the 173rd Airborne Brigade. Everybody had to come together to get things ready.
And sure enough, it was a Sunday night, got the phone call, 10 p.m. You got 4 hours to get to the arms room. So we said our goodbyes and we went and got our weapons, went up to Aviano.
Well, it was during our operation in Iraq that we were able to work with some new equipment that we never actually took to the field before. We had remote satellite transmission capability and a briefcase package.
And lets family and friends back home know that their loved ones are all right. We're the 173rd Airborne Brigade at Brashear Airfield. Army Private Jonathan Bell.
Our folks were able to actually embed with deploying CTAF forces and generate the products that you see on the air from the desert.
We had a reporter from the Washington Post, a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and 2 guys from CNN. And for me, that was a real boon because what that did was having those guys there broadcasting to the world opened up a lot for me and Bell as AFN reporters because you get a lot of that military pull where they don't want you to release things. Well, now it was, hey, CNN just told the world, can I tell Europe, would that be okay?
And their products would appear in the newscast the same day for all of the EUCOM audience as well as the audience in northern Iraq at that time was capable of receiving AFN services by way of satellite decoder.
Being on the ground, doing that first stand-up over the satellite phone, it was all pixelated, sending it up there, but knowing that I was standing there in Iraq giving this stand-up, really, that was like one of my high points of my military career.
Well, that's the mission. That's the mission.
For AFN South, the mission means continued support for deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and throughout the Mediterranean. They will also be returning to full network status, sharing AFRTS broadcast responsibilities with AFN Europe.
We have the requirement for 2 transponders, and we could have very easily put a second transponder in Mannheim. However, today we have challenges as a Department of Defense for force protection.
Currently, AFN Europe in Germany has the only uplink in the region. This dish expands Vicenza's capabilities to broadcast the same signals.
Dishes are large, they're easy targets, and we needed to make sure that if one or the other facility was a target, a successful target, that we could still provide AFRTS to the audience, because they're going to look to us to want to know what happened, and we have to be on the air.
We're providing expanded service offerings through this uplink in Vicenza and taking some of the burden off of the uplink program stream at Mannheim, our higher headquarters, at AFN Europe headquarters. And what that basically does is provide more bandwidth to provide additional services.
Today, we have basically 9 channels, and the 10th channel being the program guide, that are delivered between Mannheim and AFN South to the UCOM audience. And within the next 2 years, every local station will have their own direct-to-home satellite delivered service as well.
We don't have to pick up big towers and transmitters. All you do is pick up your decoder and your small satellite dish, and wherever you go, you take that with you.
And at the same time, we can have all these channels to broadcast on, all these different opportunities to reach people that people are going to want to watch more, so therefore my command information can get out more as well.
Local command information that is designed to protect the force, sustain mission readiness, and enhance quality of life.
Our role has never changed. No matter how technologically challenged we become, and all the equipment and things that we bring in, the role of AFN continues to be the same.
The product is the same. There's still information for the troops, entertainment for the troops.
AFN, getting the information out, keeping soldiers informed. I really wish that a lot of the news networks and stations in the States would mirror what AFN does.
I think it's a necessary part of everybody's life. And I think as far as the military is concerned, Army, Air Force, Marine, and so on, this touch of home has got to continue.
I think it's a great thing. It's a piece of home.
I've never lost my passion for broadcasting, for TV news in particular, but I like radio and TV broadcasting in general.
It was a great place, it was a great mission, a great environment. Who wouldn't want to be a DJ or a radio broadcaster or a producer, a director, writer, walk off base, and you're in Bella Italia.
That was a wonderful time in my life, and the folks here did a lot for me, both professionally and personally.
Congratulations and well done on 50 years of service and continued service for the future.